My name is Julie Bigger. I am one of the founding members of the SECS Parent Advocacy Group, along with Suzanne Winton, Kathleen Todd, Tammy Von Bank, and Katie Baker. Again, welcome. Thank you all for coming tonight. With the change in the parent-teacher conferences to today, directly conflicting with our forum, we know there are a lot of teachers that really wanted to attend, but have district duties to attend to. So even though they are not here, we would like to say thank you to all of our teachers for doing such a great job this year. We know the transition has been a tough one, but we appreciate all your hard work. But welcome to parents, educators, one board member that came, thank you Mike, he's in the back there. And I would like to take the time to introduce our new superintendent who's going to be starting in June. Eric Schnabel came to join us this evening. Eric, and we look forward to having you back in the district. An enormous thank you goes out to all of our speakers, Jen Moore, who is the president of the Sherburne-Orville Teachers Association, and the CETA Executive Council, for being so gracious in offering their support so parents had an opportunity to educate themselves with regard to education reform in New York. The main reason for their co-sponsorship was for insurance purposes, so the event would be covered. However, it is important to note that the SECS Parent Advocacy Group's view of the Common Core state standards, New York State standardized testing, and data sharing does not reflect the opinion of the entire CETA membership. However, the Sherburne-Orville Teachers Association does support the rights of parents to hold a parent meeting to inform themselves on these very important issues concerning the state of education in New York. CETA also supports the rights of parents to make informed decisions concerning the education of their children. So once again, we'd like to thank Jen and the CETA Executive Council. It is important to note that all surrounding districts have different policies. If you have any questions regarding your own district, please ask your administrators what their policies are regarding the refusal of the tests. Some things that I need to mention as you listen tonight, if you are weighing your decision to refuse the test or not. I have met with Mr. Jusinski and Ms. Emhoff regarding our school's policies as how to handle the students that will refuse the test this year. It is important that if you do decide to refuse, that you submit your refusal letters to our administrators as soon as possible. There are form letters here that our administrators said will be accepted as a refusal letter. If you are a Sherburne-Orville parent, your refusal letter, if you are a Sherburne-Orville parent, you can fill it out tonight, leave it, and we can make sure that it gets to the right person. If you are from another district, feel free to take the form letter, but make sure that your administration will accept it as a valid refusal. The elementary school policy on refusals is that the student will be removed from the classroom and put in an alternate location and given other activities to do. The middle school policy is that students will be given an instructional packet at their desk to do while others are testing. After the 90 minutes that is allotted for test time, all students will be allowed to read a book. If you have any questions or concerns with regards to these policies, please let us know or call your principal directly. So tonight we have 6 speakers and a video, as well as 2 additional parents who would like to speak. We will use the rest of the time for a question and answer session. So if you could hold off all your questions until the end, it would be appreciated. So at this time, I would like to introduce Betsy Bloom. She is a professor at Harvard University and a co-founder of Oneonta Area for Public Education, and she is going to discuss the Common Core and how we got here.
Good evening, everyone. So yes, I am a professor at Harvard College in Oneonta in the education department, but I'm also a veteran social studies teacher. So I was a 10-year middle school social studies teacher in Oneonta as well. So I think I have, and I'm a parent, so I've got multiple perspectives on this issue. But tonight I'm going to be talking to you about the historical context that brought us to this point. So you may be wondering how it came to be that we're in this educational mess we are in today. It may feel like the changes you've seen in the last year have landed suddenly in our laps. but it's actually the culmination of a process that began unfolding in the early 1980s. It's been a completely bipartisan effort carried forward by corporate interests since Reagan commissioned a report called A Nation at Risk in 1983 that blamed the American education system for faltering economic conditions. A series of federal laws aimed at improving schools as a way to solve these economic problems was passed over the ensuing decades. You know that I'm standing on tiptoe? I need to fix this. I don't think I can do this for 5 minutes. Okay, is that better? Better. A series of federal laws, When Obama was elected in 2008, he felt right in line with the previous program's focus on high-stakes tests, holding schools and teachers accountable for students' test scores, handing public dollars in the guise of promoting innovation over to private enterprises. Obama's version was coined Race to the Top, and like No Child Left Behind, it put our public schools out for sale. Like with No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top requires that states deal with so-called failing schools by taking dramatic steps, such as firing teachers and staff and closing schools and replacing them with charters, which are independent schools funded by public dollars, many for profit. I would tell you that this idea of failing schools is a myth, perpetrated by those who would benefit from it. Look around, consult your own experience. Would you say that your education system is broken, that your school is failing? Because that's the brush that you and your teachers and your school is being painted with. Blaming the dropout rate on teachers and schools is simply a convenient way for politicians to avoid dealing with the very difficult problems caused by poverty, which no amount of testing will ever solve. We know that a child's achievement is tied directly to her parents' income, education level, and zip code. Schools that have large numbers of children at risk of school failure are schools with high numbers of poor children and high numbers of English language learners. It's not the schools, it's not the teachers, it's the socioeconomic conditions that children bring with them to school. So in order to receive federal education dollars, Race to the Top required that states adopt a new set of national standards called the Common Core State Standards, test students using tests that are aligned with the core, expand the number of charter schools, and implement new teacher evaluations tied to children's test scores. If you're wondering why we call it a corporate reform movement, that's because it is. The stream of money flowing through schools into corporate pockets since No Child Left Behind has turned into a flood with Race to the Top. The educational industrial complex capitalizes on billions of federal dollars allocated to states. Consultants and vendors sell their services and products to develop testing and data collection systems, teacher evaluation systems, and technology support for test preparation and more. It's no mistake that philanthropist business people like Bill Gates, for example, who stand to benefit enormously in this enterprise, have underwritten much of its development. It's been estimated that states will spend $16 billion tax dollars in order to implement the Common Core State Standards. Public education has become a cash cow for an exploding corporate education sector. I've just read that it's estimated now that education is a $1.7 trillion industry. In New York, for example, as 25 other states, Pearson, a multi-billion-dollar British publishing conglomerate, has virtual monopoly on many assessments our children take. Federal dollars come into our districts and flow right back out the door to Pearson. It's like we're being issued coupons with Pearson's name on them. And the money that's allocated to schools to pay for the tests isn't enough. So schools, in addition to the state funding, have to come up with ways to pay for the balance, to pay for implementing these standards. As I'm sure you know, children failed the first round of tests last year in huge numbers, 71% in all. These scores may have been very bad news for demoralized children and teachers, but very good news for business. We are told that schools will improve if forced to compete. It's a market ideology applied to the public sector, and it's been promoted by hedge fund managers, entrepreneurs, private foundations, and the United States Department of Education. These people believe that public education is a bad thing, and in fact that the whole public sector is bad, and it needs to be privatized and marketized in order to save it. We know that this approach is wrong, and the speakers joining me here tonight will explain exactly why. The good news is that you people have shown up here tonight. We are here together, and our different perspectives knit together will make us stronger as a force to be reckoned with. We are going to have a chance to talk about what's wrong tonight. We're also going to focus on what we can do about it as democratic citizens. We have a right to a voice in our public education system. We pay for it, and we aim to use it. Our opponents are powerful, but we have right on our side. John McKenna, a principal from Tonawanda, New York, replied when asked how we could ever fight against such powerful forces, "The moral arc of the universe leans towards justice," and I believe him. Thank you.
Next up is Ken Sider. He is a 26-year veteran elementary educator and has taught grades K, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and multi-age classes. He is an adjunct professor of education at SUNY Oneonta and a doctoral candidate at SUNY Albany School of Education. The title of his presentation is A Teacher's Perspective on Education Reform in New York.
Good evening. Thank you for coming out tonight. I've been asked to participate to offer the perspective of an elementary school teacher, which I will, but by the end I'll be speaking to you as a parent because I also have a child in the public school system. I primarily taught the early grades in elementary school, but I'm going to share with you what I've observed and heard through K-6 in elementary schools. This year, many school districts across New York State have required their elementary school teachers to use instructional scripts called modules. Now, to be clear, a module is not the Common Core. The Common Core is a set of learning standards that you could use the modules to teach. Okay? Not every district is using modules, but many are. The Common Core learning standards themselves are contested, and there are very serious concerns about the Common Core. But I'm only going to talk about the modules now. Okay? So modules are instruction manuals, and they're written by a corporation, not by school districts, not by teachers, and they dominate the school day. A module is a day-by-day, minute-by-minute, step-by-step direction manual that actually forces me, and all the other teachers, to teach with the manual in my hand and one eye on the clock. Topics of study and teaching methods are determined by the module, and teachers have no authority to change either the content or the procedures. In fact, if you ask, your district will probably tell you what state ed says, that you need to follow the module with fidelity. Modules prevent the teacher from shaping the learning environment in ways that are responsive to children's interests, their passions, but most importantly, their needs. These automated teaching methods eliminate the possibility for wonder, curiosity, and self-direction. To illustrate what's been lost in my classroom, I would like to share a story from one of my recent third grade classes. In 2012, during a social studies unit on Kenya, my students and I read a newspaper article from Mombasa about two children who were walking to school when they found what they thought were two stray kittens. They took the kittens to the game warden at the nearby Savo National Park, who identified the kittens as striped hyena cubs. Now, this incident became very big news in my classroom, not only because the cubs were cute, but as we learned, the striped hyena is nearing endangered species status. So due to my kids' enthusiasm, we found and watched a news program about the hyena cubs on the Kenya television news channel. That same afternoon, at a weekly class meeting held on the rug in the reading corner, Jasmine asked us if the striped hyena will still be alive when she's a grown-up. And despite all my kids' eyes on me, I had no answer. No one knew the answer. But Jasmine's question established a turning point in our year. This unexpected conversation changed the mood and shifted our class's attention to the plight of the striped hyena. The class immediately decided to take action. They split up into groups and did online research. They searched for information at home, and they searched during the school day. We expected to find an organization dedicated to protecting the striped hyena, but we found none. We did happen upon an article written by a scientist named Dr. Aaron Wagner, an evolutionary and behavior ecologist at Michigan State University. Dr. Wagner's article appeared in a scientific peer-reviewed journal, and it was daunting for us to read, but with highlighters and patience, we managed to learn a lot from his field work in Kenya. Since Dr. Wagner's phone number was on his website, the kids wanted to call him and ask him how to save the striped hyena. So 4 volunteers wrote a script and rehearsed their parts, and after calculating the time difference from New York to Michigan, we chose our moment and called. And amazingly, Dr. Wagner actually answered his phone. We were shocked, but not as shocked as Dr. Wagner. The kids introduced themselves, asked questions, and before hanging up, got him to agree to Skype with us. 1 week later, wearing homemade Save the Striped Hyena buttons and prepared with their questions, the kids gathered in our school library to interview Dr. Wagner at his office on the MSU campus. Thanks to his advice, they spent the rest of the year petitioning the Wildlife Conservation Society to devote resources and attention to saving the striped hyena. This was done through their tireless work, which integrated math, ELA, science, and social studies in a seamless, student-driven curriculum. The 3rd graders campaigned for the striped hyena by writing, designing, and distributing flyers, creating a mass email campaign reaching hundreds of recipients, holding informational school-wide assemblies in 2 other schools, hosting a blog at glogster.com, and raising awareness through their own drumming performance at SUNY Oneonta. Through the kids' efforts, our project was noticed by a National Science Foundation Center dedicating to studying biological and evolutionary processes of species worldwide. Our class was featured on their website, and we had the good fortune of consulting online with Dr. Danielle Whitaker, the director of their center. Now, looking back on that year, people might expect me to say that my students' hard work, willingness to immerse themselves in academic topics well beyond their educational level, their adroit handling of interdisciplinary content, activism, and impressive collaborative skills surprised me, but that was not correct. I was not surprised. These traits are revealed when students are encouraged to apply what they are learning to a real-life issue of their own concern. In fact, in this type of environment, compassion, industriousness, creativity, and democracy flourish. So when I'm asked what's lost in a classroom that must follow a script, I have an answer. Every element of the story I shared with you is lost. Modules force children to endure tiresome repetition, a single instructional approach that assumes every child learns at the same pace, and very long periods of sitting with little or no mental or physical breaks. Kindergartners sit daily for up to 50-minute math sessions and 90 minutes of ELA. First graders have 1-hour skill sessions followed by 1-hour listening sessions and another 90 minutes for math. Children are frustrated and some to tears while others are acting out. And this frustration does not end at 3 o'clock. The modules include mandatory daily homework, even for little ones. Many teachers themselves have been reduced to tears, not just because of the burden of learning this new, bewildering instructional system, but because we have become the tools for stripping the joy from learning. This is the 3rd grade English Language Arts module for 10 weeks of the year. All of it a technical manual with directions for teaching, minute by minute, day by day. This is the math module for 10 weeks, also scripted day by day. Together, both of these scripts are what a teacher must follow every day of school. This unprecedented turn to hyper-standardization in our classrooms stunts the blossoming of humanity in its multiple and vital forms. A mass-produced corporate culture, which is what this is anti-intellectual and sabotages opportunities for meaningful engagement as learners and critical citizens. In New York State, the modules have forced many changes. Kindergartners are not making applesauce this year and reading about Johnny Appleseed. Instead, they're studying life in colonial towns. First graders are not learning about their hometowns and their neighborhoods. Instead, they're studying ancient Egypt and ancient South American culture. Second graders are no longer visiting City Hall or tapping maple trees. Instead, they're learning about Mesopotamia, ancient Chinese civilization, and the War of 1812. And I'm afraid there's more. While not yet published, science and social studies modules are coming next. This means your child's entire school day will be scripted. Sadly, Many districts are not responding by pushing back and defending their students, but by eliminating recess, the arts, and special events. Today's educational reform movement focuses on technical skills and tests. Schooling should enable students to achieve mastery and understand bodies of knowledge presented to them. But it is more important for students to understand how knowledge and skills will inform and support them in their everyday lives. Education is more than skill and drill, more than isolated ELA skills, more than excerpts of good literature, and more than test scores. Students deserve to be educated to transcend these base expectations of the current political and educational leadership. Students are not merely commodities or consumers or data points or future employees. They are our children. But now they are being silenced through a classroom socialized for scripted engagement. And teachers are being silenced too. Student data and test scores are being misused in a system of teacher accountability that intimidates and threatens principals and teachers alike while earning unimaginable profits for corporations. A teacher evaluation system based largely on test scores is an abuse of data, which intends to fire teachers for low test scores without regard for tenure, the historic legal practice of protecting teachers from capricious decisions and shifting political winds. It's an abuse of data when third graders endure 6 hours of pre-testing in September, 6 hours of post-testing in June, another 6 hours of state testing in the spring, plus pre- and post-testing in PE, art, library, and music. This, by the way, is the testing model at other grade levels. It is an abuse of the public trust when we fill our children's days with rigid, dull, artificial experiences that are as much tedious as they are laborious. And all of this is carried out with disregard for individual students' needs. The pairing of standardized instruction and excessive testing has been thrust upon us by New York State Education Commissioner John King, an educator who, by the way, has very little classroom experience, who has never even taught in a public school, and who, as a parent, sent his own children to a private Montessori school. Last year, New York's public school students were blindsided by developmentally inappropriate tests. Due to Commissioner King and the Board of Regents' irrational insistence on rushing new curricula, their failure to provide resources in a reasonable time frame, and setting extremely high passing grades, 70% of New York State students failed. They predicted this. In fact, they planned it. They manufactured a phony crisis in education. Educators know, we know, testing is part of schooling, and tests can and do provide useful information about student learning. Teachers have always assessed students through math tests or asking kindergartners to identify sight words, but these are not high-stakes tests. These measures inform our instruction and help children succeed, but high-stakes tests are different. High-stakes tests are destructive and are being used against our children. In this present test climate, teachers are forced to teach to the test in a manner that we have never known. A low score on a one-time test can force a child to be pulled from the regular ed classroom and to attend a remedial class. And I know this because my daughter, an A student, did not score high enough on her end-of-year test and spent the following year attending remedial class in math. Teachers are under intense pressure to literally force their young children to score high on these tests. In addition, in September, teachers are required to predict each student's annual growth. Even though we don't know our students, we must actually predict student scores on the tests. And being wrong has serious consequences and lowers a teacher's annual performance score. In Western New York today, teachers are currently facing administrative hearings where they must fight to keep their jobs, all because of test scores. State Ed calculates parts of teacher scores using a formula they refuse to disclose. Therefore, teachers are not even able to defend themselves in hearings. Testing has consumed public education. How much time should we even devote to administering tests or preparing for tests? Test prep requires students to put aside learning in order to literally practice taking the test. In this school here, like every other school in New York State, your students are undoubtedly devoting at least all of March to test preparation, which starts grades 3 through 8 in April. And in many schools, the test preparation is embedded in the 10-month program. I'm afraid that the news gets even worse. New York State is now field testing online exams to be administered to all students 3 times a year. In a few years, the park test will be part of the normal school culture. But it's not normal. Speaking as a parent, if my daughter were in elementary school today, I would exercise my right to have her to refuse to take the tests. I see no good reason to voluntarily participate in a testing program that is not only anxiety-producing and unnecessary, but optional. The majority of teachers, along with principals and superintendents, are unhappy and upset, but also intimidated and threatened. In this frightening moment in America's educational history, teachers have been vilified. Corporate leaders, bureaucrats, and politicians cast teachers as the problem, and worse, as being resistant to their so-called high-quality education reform. For this reason, teachers do not comprise an adequate first line of defense for our kids. Teachers need parents to speak up for the children. It is not for the teacher's benefit, but for the children who are subjected to a system that views them as 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s. Tens of thousands of parents across New York State are involved and vocal. Once parents know what is happening and what is coming, it is difficult to remain silent. Teachers are being threatened with disciplinary action if we speak to parents about these reforms, or if we suggest that you opt your child out. And school administrators know state ed is monitoring their public messages, particularly on district websites. Therefore, educators will not tell you what they really think, at least while they're on school grounds. At an event last week in Oneonta, classroom teachers told us that they will tell parents what's going on in the grocery store, at a basketball game, but not at school. As parents, we can't be silent. The consequences are too great. As parents, we cannot rely on our school districts to do the right thing. It's up to us. Our silence today will only hurt our children tomorrow. Thank you.
Next up, we have Kirsty Van Slyke. She is an Associate Professor of Secondary Education at SUNY Oneonta and also the author of The Nurturing Teacher, Managing the Stress of Caring. She is going to discuss In Bloom, data mining, and the future of teaching.
So like the people who spoke before me, I also have a background in teaching high school English. I taught 9 through 12 before I got my doctorate at Binghamton University and started at SUNY Oneonta. That's what I'm currently doing, is working at SUNY. I'm here tonight to talk to you about In Bloom. How many of you are familiar with In Bloom? I've heard about it. That is more hands than I've seen in a long time. Usually when I go out to these things, I see 1, maybe 2 hands, so it's encouraging to see more hands. Some of you may be familiar with the company, but for most people, this is the first time they've heard about it because the state isn't really good about communicating what their plans are with In Bloom. The short response for explaining In Bloom is that it's a data warehouse. It's a data integration service which is going to store information based on students so that districts have access to that information, which could be a good thing, but there's a downside to it as well. The longer answer is that In Bloom is a non-profit corporation, founded by the Gates and Carnegie Foundation for $100 million. It was created to collect personally identifiable student and teacher data from districts with the intention of making that data easier to access for schools, but also with the intention to share it with approved vendors. The data is being stored in the cloud, run by Amazon.com, with an operating system created by Wireless Amplify, which is a subsidiary of News Corporation, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch. You might remember his name. He was the one behind that big phone tapping scandal that happened recently, well, a year ago or so. In Bloom is planning to commercialize that data with the agreement of states and districts by offering it up for sale for profit corporations. And all this is being done without parental consent or parental notification. At least 9 states originally planned to disclose their personal student data within Bloom, and after protests, states have now officially withdrawn or claimed they never intended to share that data in the first place. Of the original 9, only 3 remain: Massachusetts, Illinois, and New York. And of those 3, New York is the only one that is fully committed to uploading our children's data. Behind me up here on this screen, can you scroll down through it? You can see a list of sponsors for this initiative. And while I'm not familiar with all of the sponsors on the list, I am concerned about the role they're going to play in data sharing, and I'm concerned about the types of information pertaining to my child that will be released for marketing purposes. They talk about it being secure, but how secure is it if my daughter's information is bouncing from server to server? You know, if Target can get hacked, you have to start to wonder. If Amazon can get hacked, and Amazon is one of the ones that's focused on posting this information, that worries me. One of the corporations that's up here towards the top is an open source code corporation. So their code for how they're storing the data is available to the public. Hackers, maybe? I don't know. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. So you have to wonder about how secure that information is. Starting this fall, all districts were required to sign up for an educational data portal known as the Engage New York portal, which is the data dashboard, accessible to teachers and school administrators that would pull data from the InBloom cloud. Companies with state contracts to receive personal student data from these dashboards include Connect EDU, eScholar, and no surprise with the last one, Pearson SchoolNet. The state spent $50 million in federal grants to partner with InBloom, and it finalized its agreement in October to share this data with a fledgling company. However, due to delays putting together the portal system, it was delayed in January, but it is scheduled to go up tentatively in April, and some data has already been uploaded as a trial. InBloom Inc. is planning to collect about 400 student and teacher data points. Now, you may have seen Commissioner King when he talked at the Senate educational hearing, and he tried to defend those 400 points by saying, well, some of those points are street, and then the city you live in, and your zip code, so that's 3 points. But your address is a lot smaller than 400 points. When you actually look at the breakdown, there are some concerning categories there. Many of the data points are highly sensitive and controversial. New York State officials have said they're sharing student names, test scores, home addresses, grades, disciplinary and attendance data, economic and racial status, program participation, including, quote, whether or not a student is entitled to special education, IEP and 504 indicators, ELL, English language learners, educational services and accommodations, disciplinary records, attendance records, special needs records, testing records, including the results of academic and psychological tests, address, phone numbers, photos, social security numbers, email address, birth dates. That's some of the 400 data points that can be shared with third-party vendors that are contracted through the city and state officials. InBloom's data elements also include, for instance, family relationships, such as identifying categories as foster parent, or, I love this one, father's significant other, or reasons for enrollment changes, such as withdrawn due to illness, or, quote, leaving school as a victim of a serious violent incident. The disciplinary section allows for identifiers in its system, including subjective designations like perpetrator, victim, and principal watch list. This is something that will follow your children, so your kindergartner that bites someone out of frustration in the classroom is now labeled a perpetrator for the rest of their life. InBloom is also collecting teacher data, including names, addresses, social security numbers, and detailed employment histories, all linked to student test scores. But whether New York is sharing those data points with InBloom is currently unknown. We do know it's available in the system. InBloom is collecting way too much data, creating an unnecessary security risk by putting it in a centralized repository and making it too easily available for commercial entities. It will be shared with for-profit vendors for target marketing purposes. In addition, such a storehouse for information is a perfect target for hackers to steal an identity. 12 New York City parents and guardians brought a lawsuit to prevent the city's educational department from using InBloom to store student data, but that lawsuit was dismissed in February. 2 bills, namely A6059A, was passed unanimously by the Assembly last session and is now introduced in the Senate as S5932. It would put strict limits on the state's ability to share any personal information with third parties, and it would prohibit any vendor from re-disclosing such information to third parties without parental consent, because that's another problem. Once a third party has purchased that information, what's their responsibility with it? Note that these bills, they only create safeguards, they don't stop the process. So that's another piece that is of consideration. So let's be clear here. It's not just aggregate data to keep track of a school's report card based on testing scores. This is detailed data that's going to follow students from class to class, grade to grade, school to school, and potentially even as they enter into college. This is data that is personally identifiable and can be bought or stolen. My daughter, she's sitting over in the corner, she is not for sale. I'm not comfortable with her personal information going on the internet. Are you comfortable with your children's information being there? Because that's a concern. Governor Andrew Cuomo's Common Core Implementation Panel has recommended that the state stop working with In Bloom Inc., but not for the reasons that I just listed, the reasons that we see. It was halted because it was, quote, a distraction to the implementation of the Common Core. Heaven forbid that gets in the way. So privacy concerns become secondary here. We need to contact our state representatives and remind them of our concerns and push them to demand that New York State halt any data uploading and then also recall the trial data that has already been posted there. Thank you.
Next up, we have Dr. Carol Makota. She was a public school teacher of ELA for several decades in classrooms from grades 7 through 12. Dr. Makota has been a teacher educator and also teaches writing at the college level. She has encouraged and guided thousands of readers and writers during those years. She has also prepared students for regents, RCTs, intermediate state assessments, yearly state exams, and benchmark assessments, leaving the public school before SLOs for APPR were mandated. Dr. Makota was recently nominated to replace existing members of the Board of Regents and endorsed by the New York State Allies for Public Education. She is going to discuss how the Board of Regents affect educational policy in New York and how they are selected.
Thank you. I am going to tell the story of my not getting appointed to the Board of Regents. But I wanted to back up a little bit. I started teaching in the 70s before the 1983 study that Betsy Bloom mentioned. And I saw the testing increase every year from 1998 in New York State. My own sons went through that at the turn of the century and into the zeros. They're still reeling a bit from some of the effects of NCLB, and I had to leave my classroom. I felt that it was ethically wrong to do what we were doing to our students. And so, last spring, I decided to ask Albany at a couple of forums where Regent Talon was at the first one, and my assembly representative, Cliff Crouch, who's I count as a friend now. I went to the forum and I asked Regent Talon, I said, what would it take for us to step away from Race to the Top and In Bloom that Kirsty mentioned and all of that? Because we entered into the Race to the Top by choice. And I said, well, what would it take? I didn't get an answer, and I asked again in December when the Regent and Commissioner King came, and even Chancellor Merrill Tisch came to Binghamton. I asked them, what would it take to not get that money that isn't enough to pay for what we're doing anyway? Let's just not do this. We could do this. You know, we can stop this in mid-air. If we can build an airplane in mid-air, we can stop it in mid-air. And that was the thing that Dr. King was talking about. So I didn't get an answer, and then I found out in January that the Board of Regents had some openings and that maybe I could run for the Board of Regents. Now, to run for the Board of Regents means that your name gets nominated in the Assembly and Senate and they have to vote on you. So it doesn't mean that all of you can vote for who's going to be on the Board of Regents. It means that your Assembly member and your senators vote for them. Now, if you're like me, you thought about the Board of Regents as like this cloud of people up in Albany, and you didn't know who they really were, like probably lots of old men, you know, like God. And I found out when I researched this that the Board of Regents is who really sets policy. It's not Commissioner King. He got appointed by the Chancellor and the Board of Regents. These people are responsible for what's happening to your students, your children, in schools every day. And then I looked into what sorts of people are actually on the Board of Regents. I knew that I was highly qualified. I'm an educator. I've been in classrooms since the 70s. Well, it turns out that there are a handful, maybe 3 or 4 people on the Regents that had any public school teaching background, any classroom education background and understanding. It's true, there are a lot of people involved in administration at the policy level, not at the school level. And there are lots of lawyers. There are some doctors, because the Board of Regents is in charge of certifying not only teachers, but people in healthcare fields, beauty salons, all sorts of certifications. There are a lot of people from Wall Street in the 17-member board. And I said, well, what's up with this? Why are they telling me what I have to do in my classroom? Why are they deciding that we're going to do all this to our students? Well, I had the support of the New York State Allies for Public Education, which is a groups of parents across the state. And they did a great job at getting my name out there and getting my qualifications out there. I spent a lot of years in classrooms. Then I spent some years studying education at a higher level. I did actual research about how to teach writing and what happens to students when they leave high school and go to college as writers. And I wrote my dissertation or book about that. They got that word out. But then I went to Albany, and I sat in a room with a microphone like this, and 2 committees, the Education Committee of the Assembly and the Higher Education Committee of the Assembly, gathered and asked me questions. Well, I'll tell you that for me, they were very easy to answer. For somebody that's not been in a public school, they would be rather difficult to answer. And indeed, some people didn't answer them very well. And then, it wasn't this past Tuesday, but the Tuesday before, all of the senators and assembly members got together and voted on whether to return the same people who had whose terms had expired, return them to the Regents, Board of Regents, or whether to give a chance to some other people like me and some other people that may have had some education background. Well, there's gridlock in Albany. I don't know if you've noticed it. It's a lot like Washington, D.C. The Republicans and the Democrats vote the party line. They don't sit and think each individually, well, how am I going to vote on this particular matter? How am I going to vote on this? How do I feel? How do my constituents tell me they feel? Because many parents have contacted the assembly members and senators, and yet 3 incumbents were returned to the Board of Regents. 3 people who had, those men up in the clouds, were returned, and in fact, when one person actually resigned, they quickly found someone who had not interviewed in the regular interview situation. So they did things by the back door. That should sound familiar too if you watch the evening news at all. It was an education to me. I found out the answer to my question when I said, can we step back from these policies that are not going so well? The answer is, if you've got money or if you can make a lot of noise, you can change things. And so I was not appointed. In fact, I was very lucky that Cliff Crouch, my assembly member, actually nominated my name from the floor because it wasn't going to get there otherwise. I got 38 votes. You need 107. The Republicans in the Senate voted no to everything. The Democrats voted for the incumbents because they've been told to do that by a very powerful man from Manhattan named Sheldon Silver, who's been in New York politics since 1977, about as long as my career. And so I don't have money, and I'm one person. I can't make a lot of noise alone, although believe me, I'm going to be there again next January and February, and I'm going to run again for an at-large position that will come open. But parents, you can make noise. And I'd like to tell you about some of the ways that you can make noise. The first thing, obviously, that's what this is about refusing to have your 3rd through 8th grader actually take those pre-tests and practice tests and the actual tests in April and May, and then the post-tests, and the hours and the minutes and hours and sometimes half days and days that are given to this testing. There are a lot of reasons to refuse the testing. For one thing, your child at least will not have to suffer that tedium. I'm not against testing. I'm a teacher who needs to assess my students, but I know how to do that. I don't need some company creating tests for me. You'll also be providing a model for other children and other parents who haven't quite caught on that this is something they could refuse. That's another reason why that's a good thing for you to do. You'll also support the teachers who, as you've heard, have been treated like they are the bottom rung of any ladder in the world. When they are working so hard, no one wants teachers' jobs, but teachers do. We love to teach. We don't do it for money, you know that. It's our way to support them so that they can do things like investigate that animal. I can't remember what animal that was. The striped hyena. Because one kid has a question, and that's how learning happens. They ask a question and they find an answer by searching and learning. Teachers can't do that now because they're following a stack of papers that thick. That's if their school has decided to do that. So that's a third reason you can support teachers. You can also put In Bloom right where it belongs, which is in the garbage can, by not having your student tested. And I thank Kirsty for opening our eyes to where all of the other groups that are pulling into In Bloom because they can make money. These are our children. They want to make money. Teachers have been doing this not to make money for many years. Now somebody sees a way to make money, and so they're all on it. The fifth reason I want to give, and this is a really big one, if 10% of our school population refuse these tests and don't get data entered into this, it will really mess things up. Now there are about over 2 million students in the public school systems in New York State. That was true last year. If over 200,000 actually refuse the test, we could really mess up the data collection and the testing scheme. I would love for that to happen. I know thousands on Long Island alone are refusing. Thousands did last year too, right? Sure, Steve? There were people refusing even as early as last April. So those are some reasons why you should refuse the test for your student. There's some other things you can do though. If that makes you feel uncomfortable, fine. But you can ask questions about all this. And I think we've given you a lot to chew on here. You can ask questions at school board meetings, whenever you meet up with people who are involved in education. You can talk to other parents and let them know that this is an option, this refusal and this questioning. You can vote and write to the people you vote against and write to the people you vote for and tell them why you are voting that way. I'm writing a note to every one of those 38 people who voted for me. And in November, when I vote some incumbents out of office because they blindly did whatever they were told to do when voting about education matters, I'm going to tell them why I voted against them. Doesn't take very long to send an email, does it? And it only takes a few sentences to let them know and then go click on send. So vote and explain it. Tell your story. I just told you my story. We're telling you little bits of our stories. Tell your story about your child who came home in October, exhausted and saying, I never want to go back to school again. I thought it was bad back in the zeros. And my own son was taking all of those tests. It's worse now. You're seeing that close up and personal. You're seeing the worksheet that comes with the modules, with that mandatory, I can't believe that, mandatory homework. And there's research out there telling us that certain kinds of homework just aren't any help at all. And yet, worksheet. Tell your story to these people, to the governor who's getting money from Pearson, to your senator who may be investing, we don't know. Your assembly member who's doing what Sheldon Silver tells them to do, unless it's a Republican. Put a sign in your yard and on your car. Communicate with student's teacher so that your child's teacher, so you know when those pre-tests and post-tests and this test and that test and the practice test and these hours and that, so that when you do decide to refuse, you know what's coming up. And remember, the other thing I have to keep reminding myself, remember that these are human beings all along the way. We want them to remember our children are human beings. We want them to remember that we're human beings trying to get by in New York State in the early 2000s. They're human beings too. So let's write to each other and tell each other our stories. Thank you very much.
Let's face it, parents. School today isn't anything like when we were kids. Sure, we took tests, and our kids will too. But how much testing is too much? And though we all want our kids to succeed, do they have to endure a minimum of 400 minutes of testing every spring to be deemed successful? Of course not. Parents across New York State already know that learning is complex and looks different for every child. They also know that tests reduce our children to numbers, data points, and measure only a tiny fraction of what's important, all while ignoring creativity, critical thinking, and teamwork. Despite repeated efforts to share concerns with leaders at the New York State Education Department, parents continue to see schoolwork and homework devoted to test prep. It's no surprise then that a record number of parents across the Empire State will again refuse to take part in grade 3 through 8 testing this spring, starting on April 1st. Though Regents exams required for graduation should not be refused, grades 3 through 8 ELA, math, and science exams can be refused without consequence to your child, the classroom teacher, or the school. Yes, you can refuse the tests, and you can refuse without consequence to your child, the classroom teacher, or the school. Getting started is as easy as writing a letter to the school principal and checking in with the classroom teacher, just to notify her of your child's intent to refuse the test with your permission. With a bit of advance notice, a majority of the time school officials facilitate test refusals in a comfortable way, allowing students to work in a separate location instead of taking the test, or to read at their desks while the test is given. It is common for schools to let you know that there is no provision for students to opt out. But you're not opting out, you're refusing. And in doing so, you're advocating for your child's best interests and exercising your constitutional rights as a parent to guide your child's education. That's right, you've got history on your side. And other parents, too. In fact, it's estimated that over 10,000 students refused New York State tests last year with great success, and their parents are ready to help you navigate any roadblocks that you may encounter. The team over at New York State Allies for Public Education has plenty of tools for you to use too. After all, there's no good reason for your child to take grades 3 through 8 state tests. None. There are also no negative consequences to your child. Your child will be counted as a refusal and won't get a 0 on the test. New York State test scores aren't recorded on report cards anyway, and your child cannot be denied academic support services if he doesn't participate. The outstanding teachers of New York State use a variety of measures to assess student progress, not just test scores. Those same teachers know that your child's refusal won't negatively impact their own evaluations, because let's remember, your child is marked as a refusal, not a 0, and therefore won't be used for teacher accountability purposes. And there's more good news. Even though you may have heard that if fewer than 95% of students participate in state exams, your school's funding may be lost. Well, that's just not true. To date, funding has never been taken away from a school, no matter how many kids refuse to take state tests. So once again, let's be clear. There is no consequence to school funding if you refuse grade 3 through 8 tests. There are no negative consequences to the student for refusing, nor are there negative consequences to the teacher. So what does happen if lots of kids refuse to take the tests? Parents send a clear message to the folks in Albany that focusing on tests does not equate with true teaching and learning. And parents exercise the right to direct the upbringing and education of their children by refusing to participate in the harmful culture of testing. School today isn't anything like when we were kids, but maybe it should be. Kids today deserve more than test prep and bubble sheets. They are, after all, our future. Refusing the tests really can be as simple as writing a letter. And don't forget that there are parents ready to help you along the way. Visit nysape.org to download a refusal letter and parent guideline. Join the conversation on Facebook at New York State Refuse the Tests. And don't forget to talk to other parents in your own community. You're not alone in wanting a student-centered, balanced education for your child. Join the many allies for public education. Submit your refusal letter today.
Alrighty, so now just to continue on with that theme, Danielle Boudet is a co-founder of Oneonta Area for Public Education and one of the founding members of New York State Allies for Public Education. She's a stay-at-home mother of 2 young children in Morris and has been involved in the opt-out movement for over a year now. She continues to help inform parents of their right to be involved in their children's education and their right to refuse unnecessary testing. She's going to discuss parents' rights of refusal and how to do it.
Is the sound okay with this? Yeah? Okay. I have a PowerPoint, so hopefully the clicker works. We're here to talk about a number of big reforms that were thrown at us at once. Things like the controversial Common Core state standards, an unfair teacher evaluation system, a corporate-backed plan to collect private data, and an excessive amount of testing, including the upcoming 3 through 8 state tests. Those are going to be my focus, but our children take all kinds of standardized assessments, besides the grueling state tests. Our children take pre-tests, post-tests, benchmarks throughout the year. These computer-adaptive tests and other forms of assessment are constantly used to mark their progress and judge their teachers. So you can imagine the pressure that just keeps building and building and building as the tests keep coming and coming. If you throw in field tests, regents, the SAT, and various other kinds of assessment, that's a lot of time taking tests or being prepped to take a test. The fact is that students today will spend more time testing than at any point in our nation's history. And if you have a child with special needs or one who doesn't learn on schedule, the testing time increases even more. Field tests of any kind are an easy decision to refuse. They have absolutely no bearing on your child's grades, and they use your kids as guinea pigs to try out new questions and formats. In other words, your kids become unpaid participants in market research because these tests are products, as we already talked about. They aren't made by your child's teacher. And in fact, actual educators have little input when it comes to most of the tests our kids will take. Large corporations create these tests and make a huge profit doing it. PARC is being field tested this spring, and this stands for Partnership for Assessment of Readiness of College and Career. Now that sounds very important, doesn't it? But the bottom line is that more instructional time will be lost to try out these new tests. And PARC only perpetuates the myth that our schools are failing and that the only way that we'll ever know if our kids are ready for that catchphrase, college and career, is to subject them to even more standardized tests. The PARC tests are coming, and Sherburne-Earlville's 10th graders have the unfortunate privilege to try out the new test in English language arts. So if you are considering test refusal at all, this should be your first step. Boycott the field tests. Last year, huge numbers of parents refused the grades 3 through 8 state tests on their child's behalf. And this year, we again expect record numbers of parents to refuse or opt out. Testing starts on April 1st, and in total, there will be 12 days when regular instruction will be interrupted so children can take a series of high-stakes tests. And most schools across the state are already prepping for that. For many students and teachers, this becomes an extremely stressful period in the academic year. Now, there's something wrong with education when the joy of learning is replaced with training to pass a test. So why are parents opting out? First of all, they don't like their child being seen as a number or a test score, and they certainly don't like the idea of that test score being used to judge teachers or their school. Now, these are high-stakes tests, and this inevitably forces a teach to the test mentality. And the focus on ELA and math leaves little room for other subjects and specials, and it drives a workload that is often developmentally inappropriate and that ignores valuable programs like art, music, library, gym, recess, and unstructured free play. Now these are all things that are not only outlets for fun and creativity, but these are necessary for your child's personal well-being, brain development, social development, and among other things, higher academic achievement. It's no wonder that a record number of students report hating school nowadays, or that teacher morale is at an all-time low. We know that the cutoff scores for these tests can be arbitrarily created. Even before approximately 70% of our kids failed last year's state tests, this failure rate was accurately predicted. And parents looked at their child's test score and they said to themselves, this is not an accurate picture of my child's ability. We already know that standardized testing is only one narrow way of gauging student success. And we know that these tests measure only a fraction of the qualities that we want to see in our kids. Things like creativity, empathy, independent thinking, teamwork, and more. The state tests are provided by a company that I'm sure you've heard of, Pearson Education, to the tune of $32 million. Last year, we know that they contained errors, points of confusion, and obvious product placement. These tests are copyrighted secrets. They're kept under lock and key, except during test time. That means nobody ever really has the opportunity to examine them in any depth, to better inform instruction or remediation. The data from these tests takes months to come back to the educator, and by then the student has already moved on. A teacher might learn what percentage of her class didn't grasp a particular concept, but when it comes to individual information about individual students, it's just not there. The teacher doesn't know why a student failed the test, what questions he or she got wrong, and more importantly, why he or she got them wrong. Oh, I clicked ahead, didn't I? Sorry about that. The biggest lie that we're told is that these tests are useful tools to inform instruction, but they do nothing but reduce our kids to numbers and data points. They offer no beneficial information to the classroom teacher or to the parent. But teachers are under immense pressure to get their students proficient to a certain level, regardless of whether or not the kids are ready or what their individual strengths or learning styles might be. In essence, our kids are treated like products on an assembly line. But we can't blame teachers. They're victims too, judged by a test score. We need to let them know how much we support them and keep the blame where it belongs. But there's something else parents can do. We can opt our kids out of these high-stakes tests. We can refuse on their behalf. And it starts with a letter that you can send to your building principal, your superintendent, and your child's teacher. And it also wouldn't hurt to send a copy to each member of your Board of Education as well. Now, I'm not going to read this whole letter, but I wanted to put it up there so you can recognize it when you go and print it out and send it to your school. This is an example of a refusal letter that parents have used successfully to communicate their desire to opt out, and you can find a copy at the New York State Allies for Public Education website, or nisape.org. A common response that parents hear often is that there is no provision for opting out. In other words, they're saying, sorry parents, you can't do it. Sorry about that. But this is largely semantics, because you're not really opting out, you're refusing. The language in the refusal letter is based on the language in the Department of Education's Student Information Repository System, or SIRS manual. On the screen is a portion from page 63, and it states that students who refuse are coded using 999, and they receive no score. A common myth is that students who refuse to take the test will automatically fail, but this just is not true. Furthermore, the no score will not move on to the level 2 repository, and that's where they calculate teacher accountability. So your refusal will not affect your teacher's performance. The best thing that you as parents can do is to refuse the entire test. If your child participates in even one day of either ELA or math, they will get a grade based on what they completed. Now, ELA and math are separate, so if your child takes the ELA exams and then decides later on that they want to refuse the math, that's okay. They'll get a grade for ELA, and the math will be coded using 999. So math and ELA can be refused independently, but segments of each one cannot. Now, I'm not sure what the refusal policy is here. I guess in the elementary it's very good, and in the middle school maybe not so good. But an example of a good refusal policy is the Oneonta City School District's policy. They'll accept a parent's letter without question. The student will be counted as a refusal and taken to an alternate location to read. And different schools have different policies, and there has been little direction from the state ed department. So they range from a policy like Oneonta's to the so-called sit and stare, where students have to just sit there doing nothing for the entire testing period. This policy has been condoned by groups across the state, including the New York State Allies for Public Education and the Teachers Union. The good news is that districts across the state who previously had a sit and stare policy are quickly changing it in response to public outrage. Many schools are accepting a parent's refusal letter on behalf of their child, but sometimes you have to remind them that you're exercising your constitutional rights to make decisions about your child's education. This is a section of the United States Code where it says that Congress has found that parents have the primary responsibility for the education of their children, and states, localities, and private institutions have the primary responsibility for supporting that parental role. A number of Supreme Court cases have upheld the role of parents, such as Pierce versus the Society of Sisters, where the court stated, parents possess the fundamental right to direct the upbringing and education of their children. A growing number of groups across the state support the testing boycott, including the New York State United Teachers, or NYSUT, the teachers union. They issued a statement of support for parents who opt out. NYSUT also supports teachers who choose to opt out their own children from testing. President Dick Iannuzzi from NYSUT said that he will, quote, vigorously defend any NYSUT members who are subject to any negative employment considerations for choosing to opt out their own child or who advocate to the extent permitted by law for others who opt out of state standardized tests. These are the three most common questions that we hear, so I'm going to go over these one by one. The first one, will test refusal hurt your child? It will not affect your child. These state tests have no bearing on your child's promotion or graduation. They're not kept in your child's permanent record. And if your child refuses, he or she is still entitled to academic intervention services if they need it. Those can't be taken away. Will test refusal hurt your child's teacher? And I've talked about that a little bit already. It will not affect your child's teacher. A refusal gets no score, not a 0, not a 1, and they won't be used for teacher accountability purposes. It's important to keep in mind that students of all abilities are refusing the tests, so it's unlikely that your high-performing student who refuses will affect the outcome of a teacher's performance using world scores. And the biggest sticking point, the thing that keeps the most parents on the fence is the third question. Will test refusal hurt my school? And it will not. Schools have to comply with having that 95% participation rate, or they fail to meet adequate yearly progress, or AYP. But it's important to know that this rule was set in place to keep schools from barring their low-performing students or students with needs from the test so they can buff up their own scores. That was the original intent of the 95% rule. It had nothing to do with test refusals right now. That's the way that they frame it is largely a fear tactic. If a school doesn't meet AYP, a variety of measures might be taken, including writing a plan for improvement or setting aside 5 to 15% of the school's Title I money for improvement purposes. And it's complicated, to be sure. But money's not lost, and it's not taken away. And the bottom line is this: of the many schools that did not meet AYP last year because of high numbers of test refusals, not a single one reported any type of financial penalty. Ichabod Crane Middle School in the Albany area had an incredible 26% opt-out rate. And guess what? Nothing. Nothing happened. But because this issue comes up so often, and it is complicated, and there's a lot to read, I included this link, which will take you to the New York State Allies for Public Education webpage, where you can read about the facts. They're explained there in detail with citation. We actually called the New York State Department of Education on many different occasions and pieced together all their different answers. And I think if you're on the fence, if this is the point that keeps you from sending in that refusal letter, please go here and read about it. And I think it will ease your mind a little bit. So to continue, there is no harm in opting out, but there is great harm if we opt in because we perpetuate a test-driven type of education. Now, some tests are useful tools for teachers or to determine if your child has special learning needs, and you shouldn't opt out of those, and you cannot opt out of the Regents. And I am not against useful and authentic forms of assessment that have real merit for the classroom teacher. But I am against any test that uses my child to unfairly judge teachers, or that collects his data for third parties, or that expects him to perform at a level that isn't appropriate. My personal opt-out stance is this: opt out of anything that isn't used solely to help the individual classroom teacher tailor instruction to your child's particular learning needs, or that isn't required for promotion or graduation, like the Regents. I've been asked many times, isn't it true that even if my child doesn't take the test, he'll still be subjected to the test prep and inappropriate curriculum? Yes, for now. But if enough of us take a stand and boycott these tests, the data becomes invalid, and the tests themselves will carry little meaning. They won't drive education like they were before. They might even go away if enough of us refuse. If we stand together and say no more, we can make them go away. And that can have amazing consequences. Our teachers will gain much needed autonomy in the classroom, and they don't have that right now, especially if they're teaching with modules. And they can teach in ways that have our kids' best interests in mind. They no longer have to focus on a test, and a world of possibility opens up for creative and authentic instruction. The Common Core deserves criticism. It was created without much input from real educators, and the corporate benefactors of all the testing and the materials is very troublesome. Much of it is developmentally inappropriate, especially at the elementary grades. But it's all the testing it promotes that turns the Common Core into such a monoculture of the mind. If we can remove that testing element, our teachers might be able to actually sift through this nonsense and make it work for them and our kids. This is never going to happen as long as so much is riding on a test score. We cannot buy into all of this testing and let it become the norm. Imagine what teaching and learning will be like if we do. Imagine the door will open up to huge corporate profits by companies who provide the tests, the prep materials, the modules, and the technological infrastructure to administer the tests. And just imagine the products and services will be sold when our schools are unfairly proven to be institutions of failure based on the score of a high-stakes test. The state education department is not listening to teachers, and they're not listening to parents. They're too busy following a data-driven agenda. Let us band together and remove the source of that data by refusing to participate. If we do nothing, things will only get worse, and our kids will see more testing. It's up to us to demand accountability of our educational leaders in the State Department and the Board of Regents. This culture of testing is not acceptable. If those in a position of power are unwilling or unable to make change, then we will. And you can start by visiting the New York State Allies for Public Education webpage to download that refusal letter, send it to your school. You'll find all the resources you need there to make an informed decision about test refusal. Thank you so much.
We could, but Katie Baker, you're up.
I'm a Sherburne Noble parent. I have two children. I have a 5th grader and an 8th grader, and it came where this when my son was in 3rd grade, and it was the first year that state testing was going to start counting towards the teachers' accountability, and they weren't sure how much it was going to cost, how much it was going to go through to the in 3 years to decide whether they were a teacher that was doing better or worse than the students, and it was a very stressful year for my son. A lot of that test anxiety came over from the teacher to the kids in the class, and they try not to do that, I understand, but my children are doing great at Sherburne-Millville, and this past fall I came to a Common Core meeting, and one of the first teachers I saw said, "What are you doing here? Your kids are doing great." And I said, "Well, what about everybody else's children? Everybody deserves a good education, a chance." And not more questions. We were given modules this year, and
They were saying that the modular lessons were taking 3 days when they were supposed to be taking 1 day, and just more questions and concerns. And the principal, you know, what are we going to do when they don't need all this material that they're supposed to have? And he said, we don't know. So as far as state testing and the current situation that we're in, I feel that if my son's not going to be prepared, why take the test? And as far as my daughter, she's in the Regents for math, and being in the 8th grade, we're going to talk about it, and she has that right to choose, I think, at the age of 8th grade. But it's something that I think a lot of parents are afraid to speak up about because of the criticism you get. You know, if you put something on Facebook, you have a lashback of people thinking that you're, let me think, a blog hopper and you're uninformed. And it's not true. We're just caring parents that want the best for our children and everybody's children. Thanks.
All right, well then, I guess it's my turn. The name of my presentation is A Parent Perspective and Why We Need to Lead. To understand a bit about me and why I got involved in this fight, I think is important that you know just a bit about my background. I graduated from here in 1989, and yes, we are going to have our 25th reunion this summer, so it was quite a long time ago. I attended the University of Vermont on a partial athletic scholarship where I received my bachelor's degree in 1993. And to make a long story short, I ended up spending 9 years as the head volleyball coach at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. I left there in 2004 to move back to Sherburne with my husband so he could work for the family business while we started our family. Now I am a stay-at-home mom, raising our 2 sets of twins while I run my own business out of our home. This is how I look at the Common Core, through the eyes of a coach, a mom, and a businesswoman. While I was coaching, I did everything and anything that I could do, that I could come up with, purchase, or learn to help my players. Well, why did I do that? If anybody in this room knows me, that's because I want to win. That's everything in my personality says I want to win. But most of all, I wanted to see them succeed. And although I received accolades as a coach, I am most proud of the facts that I coached an All-American, an academic All-American, several first and second team All-Conference All-Stars, All-Conference Academic All-Stars, 2 Conference Players of the Year, played in the NCAA tournament, and won 5 ECAC Conference Tournament Championships. And out of all of my players that I coached while at Carnegie Mellon, 33 out of those 35 girls came to my wedding. Now, could I have been such an effective coach under the Common Core standards? If I was coaching now, the president of the university, who has never coached before or met any of my players, would have handed me an entire season's worth of practice plans the day before practice began. And I could only have added 15% of other material to his plan. His practices took 3 hours when we only had 2. He laid out goals that all players should reach by the end of the season. When my players would ask me about something specific that came up in practice, I could not deviate from the practice plan to pursue that teachable moment. The players would be judged strictly on their statistics, and I would be judged on how those statistics stacked up with the rest of the teams playing in the state after the season was over. If I did not hit all of the numerical goals, I could lose my job. How in the world could I be an effective coach if I was not allowed to develop my own practice plans? To bring my own style, creativity, and innovation to my own team, who I knew better than anyone else? Did the president not trust that I could do a good job? How could I reach my players on a personal level if I was not allowed to coach them at their own level? How could I motivate them when I had to coach and push them according to a script that allowed for no freedom to individualize a plan to fit their needs? This is not what inspires and motivates people. I would have been miserable, they would have been miserable, and we probably would not have had a team. Either I would have been fired or for not achieving those random numbers, or everyone would have quit. So this is what I think about when I think about Common Core. This is a one-size-fits-all curriculum for students teaching to the middle. Being the mother of 2 sets of twins, I have a very unique perspective, and I know how difficult it is to not compare your kids to each other. Our first child walked at 9 months. The last one walked at 13 plus. My boys still ride their bikes with training wheels, and my girls have struggled with reading and math all year. So what? Childhood is not a race. It is a time to grow and learn at your own pace. I don't want my children compared to each other, let alone to every kid at their grade level, in order to assess where they stack up with everyone else. Our philosophy, that's my husband and I, our philosophy is that they'll get it when they get it. I don't want to push them to the point where they hate going to school and hate learning, which is what is happening too much at the elementary level right now. All of my children are very different human beings, but yet expected to hit the same benchmark as everyone else at the same time. To me, it's just completely unrealistic. To me, to be effective means teaching to the individual needs of the child and understanding exactly why that kid is the way they are. To teach them at whatever point they are at, to challenge them, but at their own level. Children come to school with all different backgrounds, knowledge, skill sets, interests, and social skills. Everyone starts at a different place, so how can we expect them to reach the finish line at the same time? Once again, after my teacher conferences today, I know my kids' teachers have done a great job teaching them this year. We all see growth, and they know my kids very well. I love to hear them talk about my kids and every single one of their personalities. Those are the people on the front lines. Those are the people that know my kids the best. But has their little black dot gotten over that stupid little gray line on their assessment sheet? No. But that's okay, because they've grown and learned, and I've seen it, and their teachers have seen it, and they have improved. So this is what I think about when I think about Common Core. These tests tell you nothing about who they really are, what they really know, and what skills they possess. If my team didn't get the expected number of wins, did that mean I wasn't a good coach? Did it mean that I didn't do everything that was asked of me, set goals, taught the girls to function as a team, help them to compete, learn to persevere and not quit, problem solve and work hard? Did it mean that the girls didn't learn and grow? Not necessarily, but that is how I would be judged, which includes so many things that are beyond my control. Everything now has to be measured and quantified, and there are so many things about human beings that make us human that cannot and will not ever be measured by any test. But that is how the state views your child, not the teachers, but the state. That they can all be boiled down to a number for the sake of accountability. Not to assess their knowledge, but to compare all kids across the board. To hold teachers accountable and close failing schools. Human beings are not meant to be quantified. Current education policy reinforces the fact that big business and big politics want to privatize education and destroy our public schools. Funding has been continually cut, and schools have been hurt through the gap elimination adjustment. Who's heard of the gap elimination adjustment? That's good, that's a pretty decent amount. For those that don't know, the gap elimination adjustment is basically a way for all schools to share their part in the state deficit. Because the state was running in the red, they're going to just spread that red out to all schools. So at the end of the year, we have to give back money to the state. And over the last 4 years, our district has lost $4.5 million. Over half of the $700 million that the state received from Race to the Top funding went to test makers instead of schools. Because of the Common Core, every year, new curriculum materials, textbooks, tests, teacher development must be continually updated and purchased. Eventually, all students must take the standardized tests on a computer, online, all at the same time. What about the technological capabilities to make that happen? Who's going to pay for all of those computers? Where is this money going to come from? We already know it isn't coming from the state or federal government or an increase in local taxes. So what is going to happen to our school? Will class sizes go up? Will good teachers retire or be laid off? What about support staff? What programs will be cut next? And who is going to make those tough decisions? What will happen to the quality of our public educational system? Will parents send their children to private or charter schools, causing us to lose more state funding? We will be left with nothing but for-profit charter schools. So what's wrong with charter schools? They are still publicly funded, but are accountable to no one. There will be no local boards, no teacher protection, no unions. They are notorious for cherry-picking their students, and not everyone is allowed to attend. They hire cheap labor from Teach for America, where prospective teachers are only trained for 6 weeks, in a place that sees teaching as a revolving door, sees teaching as a stepping stone to a real career, and does not view teaching as a long-term venture. So am I concerned about the future of our public schools? You bet. If we are going to turn the tide, take back our public schools, demand adequate funding, stop politicians, corporate America, and test makers from stealing our tax dollars, and put the control of our schools back in local elected officials' hands, parents need to lead. This has to be a parent-led movement. We are the ones that have the most at stake, our children's future, the best reason why we will succeed and won't quit. Leading is in my blood, and I am not afraid to put myself or my beliefs out there to be scrutinized. Oops, where was I? That was a good one too. Okay, leading is not easy, just like speaking is not easy. And certainly not a task to be taken on lightly. It takes a lot of time, intelligence, patience, courage, integrity, communication skills, and a thick skin. My cousin once said to me, great leaders make great targets. And yes, I've been personally attacked, called a whiner, a complainer, a blog hopper with nothing better to do, and my favorite, that mother with all those twins. But I don't begrudge those people. I invite them into the debate and respect their opinions. We just ask for that same respect in return. I have traveled all over the state speaking in front of our legislators to make our voices heard. Through social media, we began to mobilize, started a Facebook page, and promoted it. It grew almost overnight as word spread to now over 250 followers. Actually, I think today I was up to about 265. I have walked in parades, I've signed petitions, I've spoken at parent forums in front of our Board of Education, all in the hopes that people will understand that public education is under attack, and that we are not just complaining about some math homework. And this happened overnight, literally, while we all just sat on the sidelines, watched, and we woke up the next day. Bill Gates had taken private control of our public educational system. My pastor said a couple of weeks ago in his message that every day you should wake up with passion and purpose. And that is how I feel about our quest to end Common Core and helping to educate parents about the truth that is the evil behind the driving force of it. Still, parents are in the dark, afraid to step forward and voice their concerns, while others don't want to be labeled as controversial, seen as rocking the boat, or are just plain apathetic. If we don't all stand steadfast in our resolve and fight back against the powers that be, we could lose an entire generation to mediocrity. And I'm not willing to have my children be the sacrificial lambs. So refusing the test is the one thing that we have control over that does send a clear message to Albany stating that we reject these latest rounds of educational reforms. I invite you to stand with us, fight for our children, our teachers, our school, and their future. Parents, we need you all to lead in any capacity that you can. It is a marathon, not a sprint. I tell myself that every day, and we cannot afford to quit. Thank you.
Yeah, Julie.
I really want to thank all the teachers that just walked in at the end of our forum. Thanks for coming. But I sincerely thank all of our speakers. I hope they gave you some great information and that you learned a lot. And you know, they traveled far and wide to be here, so let's all give them a nice round of applause.
If you can get me the video that you made, I can put it on our website.
available to even more people.
All right, wonderful. As long as we have your permission, I'll make you sign a release. Again, thank you all who took the time to attend. Also at this time, I would like to ask for your support as I have finally made my decision to run for the school board. This was not an easy decision for me. It took me a long time to make up my mind, as I've been on the fence about it for a long time. It's certainly not something that I have taken lightly. I would be honored to serve in this position, and I'm asking for your support in voting for me when the time comes. So thanks in advance. Again, thanks again for coming, and if you have any other questions at all, we'll be happy to answer them through our Facebook page, which is the SECS Parent Advocate Group. And thanks again, and good night, everybody.